So I just want to give a little shout out that the funding for this program was provided through the American Library Association, through the Resilient Communities Libraries Respond to Climate Change pilot project. So again, thank you to them. They provided the film that hopefully you were able to watch before our program tonight, but if not, no worries. You are welcome to watch that film, and you can certainly share it with friends and family up through the end of March. So in the reminder for this event, you should have seen the link and a little password that you need to access the film Fire+Flood. So without further ado, welcome to our discussion tonight of Fire+Flood, specifically focusing on inequity and recovery in Puerto Rico. So before we get started, I just, as it was brought up in the film, acknowledging the land that we were on, specifically the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It's important to acknowledge the peoples whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution supports resources and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and the community members. So I just want to acknowledge that it was a theme throughout the film, and it also is something that we are striving on behalf in the libraries and as a community of the University of Minnesota. So it is my pleasure that we have three wonderful panelists joining us tonight. So we have Dr. Marla Perez Lugo of the University of Puerto Rico-Mayaguez, and she's also a Hubert Humphrey Distinguished Visiting Professor at Macalester College, just down the street normally of where we would be housed in McGraw Library. We also have Dr. Cecilio Ortiz Garcia from the University of Puerto Rico as well, and also a Hubert Humphrey Distinguished Visiting Professor at Macalester. And then our third panelist is my colleague, Rachel Mattson, who is the curator of the Tretter Collection at the University of Minnesota Libraries. So we're gonna kick off the evening by having the three of them share a little bit about their collection, their programs, their research, and then we will jump into some discussion questions that I have prepared, but we also encourage you all to submit questions as well. So you'll notice there's a little Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom. So if you have any questions for our panelists related to the film or just about their work in general, please use the Q&A feature in order to submit questions, and we will respond to them after their short discussion of their work. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Rachel, to talk about her work.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you all see me and hear me? Great. I'm so delighted to be here with these incredible co-panelists. And I was really excited to be asked, especially after I watched the film, because I hadn't seen the film before Kristen asked me to join this panel, and I just really loved it. And I thought that it highlighted a variety of really important questions, not just about climate change, but also about how climate change, unequally affects different people. And I think, if you've been paying attention to the news the past year or the past 3 weeks or the past, at any point in the past probably 5 years, Flint still doesn't have clean water. Puerto Rico is still suffering. Texas, people in Texas are paying $2,000 for a week of electricity. We've seen the ways in which, Hurricane Katrina obviously spotlighted this, the way that people with power often are able to escape the harshest effects of the way that the climate is changing, and the devastation and destruction that it's causing. And I thought it was really, really wonderful that this film focused on queers, because there's so much interesting thinking and work about this responses to climate change happening among queer communities, and intersectionally, obviously, as well. But also because I think a lot of times we think about the inequalities of climate change disaster experiences along race and class lines, which are obviously very important, but there are ways that I think queer and trans people do suffer in different ways and don't have access, differentially, it depends on your access to other kinds of power, but don't always have access to, it's harder to deal with a homeless shelter, or it's harder to, have a safety net, because if sometimes your family has rejected you, and you can't rely on any kind of familial support. And I just thought that the film really highlighted the very intersectional nature of the way that climate change affects people differentially. So anyway, that was more than I wanted to say about that, but I was really, really gratified to be able to watch the film, because I thought it was great. I learned a lot, and I also I feel like other people should definitely watch. I'm not going to talk too long, because I'd really like Marla and Cecilio to have the more presentational or conversational time in the beginning, but I was asked to talk a little bit about the Tretter Collection, and so I just will. Oh, I should be in present mode, I suppose. I just wanted to say a few things about the work that we do and the collections that we have that relate to some of the themes of the film. So the Tretter Collection is an archival and special collection at the University of Minnesota Libraries. We hold a variety of rare books and manuscript and other collections about LGBTQ people, both in Minnesota and beyond. We have an international collection, we have national collections, we have local collections. We have a lot of the personal papers of a variety of people, mostly from the Twin Cities, but also from, from the upper Midwest and around the world. We have organizational records, again, especially from organizations from the Twin Cities, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but also in, around the world. We have a lot of AV materials, including old Super 8 film and videotape materials. We collect oral histories. We hold ephemera, t-shirts, buttons, various other posters and whatnot. We have a lot of newspapers and magazines, zines and pamphlets, and rare books. And specifically, I just thought I'd say, some of the collections that we hold are organizations from the past that were doing work that I think is parallel to or presages some of the work that's happening that the activists in the film are talking about. And I just put up a few different organizations whose records we hold. So the American Indian Gay and Lesbian Organization, the Trans Youth Support Network, Women of Color Stir Fry, Minnesota Men of Color. All of those are sort of locally based organizations from, going back to the 60s and 70s, and ACT UP Minnesota, and a national organization called Black and White Men Together. We have a bunch of different we have a lot of publications. So we also have publications of people, rural queers who are farming and developing sort of food sovereignty and sustainability type of projects. So we do, if you are interested in these topics, you're invited to come and do research. Everyone is welcome in the archives and special collections. You don't have to be affiliated with the University of Minnesota. And if you want to use our collections, just email me, and we can work out, I can help you navigate and whatnot. The other thing I just wanted to talk about really quickly is a project that we've been doing in the Tretter recently we've been creating a podcast out of the oral histories from the Trans Oral History Project that we've been doing for the past about 10 5 or 6 years. And we released a pilot episode in June called I'm Seeing My Liberation Now, which explores a lot of things that I think are related to the film, if you're interested in some of the themes of the film. So including systemic inequality, the intersectional kind of oppressions that especially Black trans women face, and mutual aid. So the kind of work that the folks who are creating farms and sustainability agriculture and permaculture and not monoculture that is discussed and profiled in the film, is similar to the other mutual aid projects that I think are happening in different places and that are sort of profiled in the pilot episode. And then next week or the following week, I think it'll probably be around March 5th, we're going to release our second episode. And this one is about the South, but it's also about struggles for housing justice in the South and trans folks' efforts to create mutual aid and to support each other in struggles with houselessness and trying to create home and support networks for people who are displaced for one reason or another, either from disasters, there's talk about Hurricane Katrina, but also for other reasons. So, we have a website where you can subscribe to the podcast. We also, feature other trans podcasts on the podcast feed, but there's educational materials there as well. And you can follow us on Twitter if you're interested in learning about when the next episode is available. So I thought I would just highlight that because it's work that's related, I think, to the work of this film, and that kind of expands upon some of the themes in in the sort of lower 48 kind of states, especially in the second episode in the South. So if you do want to get in touch or learn more about the Tretter Collection, you can, we have a website, you can check us out there. That we have some digital collections. If you're specifically interested in stuff you can see right now on our digital collections website. And that's it for me. I'm excited to be in conversation with you all and talk more about all this stuff.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a great overview of the Tretter Collection. In the chat, I did post a link to the Tretter Collection that you saw listed on the screen there, so feel free to snag that. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Perez-Lugo and Dr. Ortiz Garcia. So if you would be so kind to share a little bit about your work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for this invitation to engage our friends and now neighbors in the Twin Cities for this last year. This has been such an enormously important experience for us of intervening in a landscape that unbeknownst to us has started to become like home. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a political scientist by training, and I have been working for the past 15 years on energy issues and environmental and energy justice issues, to be more precise. I've done that in several geographical areas. I've done some work at the US-Mexico border. I've also done it in the Caribbean and in mainland US. And for the last 14 years, I've been back home in Puerto Rico, way before Maria, studying some of the underlying conditions that made Maria such a catastrophe. And after that event, decided that my career was at a point where I needed to become an observer of the observer and look keenly at the institutions I had been living in for this last couple of decades, which are universities. And I, in our conversation, which I hope it becomes a dialogue and not a presentation, I would like to take that tack and talk about how institutions of higher learning have little by little fallen into some dangerous canals, literally after World War II and the advent of modernization and the scientification and management of the social condition through policy and other means. We have been really constructing and designing our relationships in ways that are now confronting diversity instead of embracing it. So I'll leave it at that. If you want to know anything else about me, I'll be more than willing to talk to you. And now I present to you Dr. Marla Perez-Lugo.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure for us to be here with you. Obviously, we are sitting in the same room. That means that we are related more than professionally. We are married and we have 5 kids. So our collaboration extends more. Although we met working on a research proposal, but that's another presentation. I am an environmental sociologist by training. And since I was in graduate school, I started working on the sociology of disasters. And my dissertation is on the use of mass media in the disaster management and response in the context of Puerto Rico. And I studied floods, I studied Hurricane George back then. But then I shift from the sociology of disasters because I thought that it was too grim, that the area of study was not providing really for change, cultural change, policy change, etc. And that's when I started working on energy justice, energy governance. And then came Maria. And Maria made us join those 2 areas because the main issue after the impact of the hurricane was the total collapse of the electrical system. So back home, we run the National Institute for Energy and Island Sustainability, which is a platform that interconnects faculty members from the 11 campuses of the University of Puerto Rico system. And what makes INESI interesting, I think, is that it represents more than 23 academic disciplines. So we put together groups that involve electrical engineers with community psychologists, with economists, with psychologists, etc. So we could provide a more holistic view of what energy issues were. And by the time Maria hit, we were ready. We were prepared. We had community engagement. We had developed a vision for the electrical system. So we had the resources, the knowledge, etc. And we went to our state government. And nothing happens. Nothing happened. There was no opening for local knowledge and local wisdom to penetrate the process of emergency response and recovery for a variety of reasons. But the thing is that local knowledge was excluded from that process. And here we are 3.5 years from Maria, and the system is not completely reestablished. There are more than 200,000 families in the island, in the main island of Puerto Rico, that still struggle with energy insecurity. The issues of energy burden are dramatic. We have an aging population that each day they pay more and more in electricity, and it's a necessity because they depend on electricity to survive, basically. So as I have explained, our work is with vulnerable populations in Puerto Rico. So when I watched the documentary, it was a very interesting experience because the trans community in Puerto Rico is invisible. And only when something really bad happens is that the community comes to the light. Through the media and everything. Yesterday, we honored the death of a transgender woman that was killed, Alexa, in the street just because she was transgender. So the trans population deals with a lot of vulnerabilities in normal conditions. They are in disaster mode 24/7, 365 days a year. So when disaster occurs, the problem is that those vulnerabilities exacerbate the disaster experience, and communities like the trans community, they really have a hard time. And later I can share some of the main issues that the trans community experience in the response and recovery, but we can talk about that later.
Great, thank you so much. I think I'm going to open this up now to more Q&A time. So again, for those of you joining us, if you have any specific questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature down below. But while we kind of wait for some folks, if you don't mind, I'll just kick it off with maybe a question or two here. And you both kind of already hit on this, or I should say all three of you, but in case you wanted to expand on maybe different parts, but really this film talked right about a breadth of issues. So I'm wondering if maybe you want to reflect on your own personal life, or the communities that you live in and work within. There were themes everywhere from, the importance of biodiversity, getting away from like monocropping. There were, aspects around health insecurity and access, around food, of course, the infrastructure in Puerto Rico as well, LGBTQA and kind of social justice issues. And then, of course, there was the whole idea, right, of individual and collective trauma as well. And we certainly have felt that, and especially seen that brought to light over this past year in Minneapolis with the unrest and the killing of George Floyd. So that is certainly not only an individual, but also a collective trauma, along with many other things. So I was wondering, if the three of you want to reflect on any of those issues or expand on those.
Okay, sure. I'll take a stab at that. Being a student of public policy and public administration, And all my life has been a life of questioning systems and questioning processes and questioning ways in which humans organize to do what they understand they need to do. And when I spoke earlier about some trends that I saw that were really not conducive to dealing at the root of the equity and justice issues we see now moving moving human beings to the streets and moving them to contestation and actually calling the bluff of systems now, if we could say that. We can certainly understand why situations of extreme operating environments, such as post-disaster environments, become such revealers of things that our systems themselves are manufacturing ignorance over. In fact, the existence of differences, such as gender differences, socioeconomic differences, age differences. We have managed to organize ourselves in ways where we have compartmentalized, standardized, labeled, and moved these objects, as if we may, to places where we don't need to deal with them in a day-to-day basis. And that actually goes totally contrary to diversity, to embracing the kind of relationship making that now we understand in places like in Texas, that we need a total new architecture. Not of the cables and the transmission lines and the generators we need a totally new architecture of our relationships. How we relate to our government, how we relate to private industry as it delivers such a unique service, an electric service. I'm not here to be an advocate for public or private. That dichotomy really doesn't take us anywhere here. But what I do want to bring to the discussion is, what do we need to do different when structurally we have built an architecture of division, an architecture of difference, an architecture of, like I said, ignoring or ignorance over what is at plain sight for us to see every day. What can we do as academics, for example? I have a feeling that in our ivory towers, we have been too comfortable with these structures in the past. And we perhaps need to embed ourselves on the street, embed ourselves in the places where we have been hiding those differences. And, in my class, if you go into my class and you get out of the class with all of your questions answered, I didn't do my job. So my job here is to create more questions than you came in. I don't have answers to these things, but that the experience that we lived after Maria, encountering universities in our own backyard and observing those who came to observe us and their behaviors, really taught us a lesson of how institutionally we have fallen to the point of understanding ourselves as market-driven factory resource extracting ventures, to the point where I will extract your humanity as you are taking water out of your house, even if you're academic or not, because climate change doesn't care if you're an academic or not. That so I agree with Marla in the sense that LGBTQ populations are inherently adaptive species. They have to live constantly adapting to those structures, constantly adapting to those differences and labelings of society. But that doesn't mean that I'm not talking that as a positive thing. That you're having to become an adaptive species because you have the double taxation of your own humanity plus dealing with the rest of the pressures that society puts on you and at the same time you're already in a vulnerable condition. So this is not an adaptation that I would like to mimic or pursue.
Yeah, I think something that the experience after Maria taught me was that resilience is not always a good thing. We tend to romanticize the concept of resilience and the idea of the superhero that can withstand every single blow that is thrown at them. You know, the problem is that we concentrate so much on our capacity to dodge and to adapt to those blows that we don't concentrate enough on stopping the conditions that are hitting us in the first place. So at the same time, there are social institutions like racism, like ageism, like homophobia that are too resilient. And they have to die for us to embrace diversity and for a more equitable society. So we have to start conceptualizing resilience in a non-romantic way. That's one of the main themes and lessons I got from Maria. And if I may show you a couple of pictures.
Yes, please do.
Okay, our work in the National Institute for Energy and Island Sustainability basically was divided into three different topics or areas, conceptual areas after the hurricane. On one hand, we were trying to participate in the process of decision-making related to the reestablishment of our electrical system. And that was happening in a very contentious environment. This is a protest that was count with a lot of people months after the impact of the hurricane, because most communities in the mountain region of the main island were left without electrical service. And they had to live with having the infrastructure of feeding electricity to the metropolitan area of San Juan without having access to that electricity. Okay. So that resulted in about 3,000 deaths. And those 3,000 deaths were concentrated in 200,000 families in those areas in the mountain region of Puerto Rico. So at the same time that we were trying to get involved in the decision-making process, we were trying to collaborate with vulnerable communities, and those communities that were more affected, establishing solar kiosks, We started building kiosks with solar panels in which people could recharge equipment, and the kiosk had a small fridge so people could store medication, because there was a lot of issues with insulin, for example, that has to be stored in a refrigerated environment. But because there was no electricity, well, there was no refrigeration. And I think the most important part of those kiosks was at a light bulb. Because when the night was pitch black, completely pitch black, having a light bulb was a symbol of hope, was a symbol of not everything is lost and we can see through the darkness, you know, that kind of thing. And at the same time, and now I'm going to make reference to something that Cecilia said, we had to deal with our own colleagues from US mainland institutions that were dropping into Puerto Rico because there was a lot of funding available for quick response.
It's big business. It is big business.
So suddenly we started seeing MIT, we started seeing,
You know, the names are
we started encountering researchers in our communities that, you know, they were engaging in very extractive practices. They were extracting information from the communities. They were presenting themselves as related to the recovery process, but they were not. And also they were addressing colleagues in the UPR system for information, for contacts, for data. Without considering that those faculty members from the UPR system were also victims of the disaster.
Those were the best cases.
Yeah.
Some of the worst cases are when colleagues are linked to business ventures. Some of them related to renewable energy. And their participation and their interventions in communities came with these product peddlers, you know, under the rubric of let's decarbonize the world, just to peddle your product and to peddle your merchandise, whether it's a panel or some sort of gadget that, you know, you've been able to participate in through your last NSF grant or whatever. We're you know what? It's been 3.5 years that we've been in exile, trying to spread the word of these things happening. Because if we had stayed in Puerto Rico, you probably would have never heard from us. That is something we have to live with because of our island condition. Most of you, when you were looking at the COVID map of how the U.S. was doing, you never saw U.S. island territories in that map. That manufactured ignorance that I'm talking to you about, it is very pernicious. We share with the LGBT community, we share this manufactured invisibility that allows for systems not to have to deal with you. And when they do, they deal with you in their terms. And those terms, as some of these pictures show, are very extractive. Just business as usual. It's not personal. Because we are coming to these places as if they were blank canvases where we can do our thing, because they are living laboratories for us to experiment in these places where nature has just left a clean slate for science and STEM to come in and do their thing. And these are the big questions. These are the big questions where we are all together and we share, or we should be sharing, in taking a really critical look of how we are organized today. And if we are organized to be able to deal with diversity beyond uh, beyond things like Hispanic serving institutions, or beyond STEM programs, and things that are just ways universities are using right now just to accommodate themselves in places where they can feel a little better about what we do every day.
The more you guys talk, the more I've been thinking, and I don't know what you think about this. You've obviously thought a lot about these questions, that there's sort of congealed a story about what it means to live through a disaster. In the past, however many years, there's sort of congealed a story like this happens and this happens and this happens. And it's a very limited story, but it's kind of the story of like, what happens? Like you suffer a little bit of electricity, power outage, and then the news goes away. And so people just assume that it's all been, fixed or whatever. And there's also a narrative that has congealed. So the diversity of experiences of different, both places and people and how they live through disasters is obfuscated completely. And then there's another narrative that's congealing that is about what you've just been talking about, how we respond and how we fix, or how we like what we do in the aftermath of a disaster. And that's, we bring in tech companies to help think about new ways to, products that tech companies have created. Yeah. So I don't know if that resonates with you, but
it does in ways that it's just, I'm so glad you brought that up, because working with our engineering colleagues, which we love, and we have shared so many stories, putting those solar kiosks all over the island, and meeting with communities, and actually confronting some of these product peddlers that want to sell them products that generate more kilowatt hours than the sun sometimes. Whether this is the type of merchandising of climate change and global warming that moves some of our colleagues to talk and write books such as Environment Inc. and the corporate side of environmentalism. And it's true, it's very true that but it's more intricate than that. The processes that we develop in these socio-technical systems, which are systems where humans and technology meet and create culture and create processes, the technological domination of those processes is really, really strong. For example, instead of talking about lives lost, engineerings in the power industry, they have measures like SCADA and other measures that measure the length of time and the amounts of times during the year that the system is down. And it's a big technological euphemism for life and for survival. And to tell you the truth, this has been the development of our relationship to colleagues of ours in the science and technology. It has been a very rocky road. I have become a boundary spanning object inside the social sciences. I am looked at as living in the fringes of my discipline, because I'm able to jump to another discipline and talk their language and now understand a little better the connection between society and electricity. And that has taken a long time. If we I tell you what, I don't think I want to use that as an analogy of how quickly we need to adapt to diversity and to embrace this new architecture of relationships that we're talking about, because I don't think climate change is going to give us a break. There's not enough time for us to do that. So
I'll just say one other thing, which is that what you both are talking about, and what I have been learning from the Trans Oral History Project that we've been doing at the Tretter, is the ways in which it's so important to find non-governmental solutions to collect together. And I'd love to hear more about when you guys realized that the government wasn't going to pay attention to the local knowledge you were bringing from the National Institute that you'd created. What happened, and where did those kiosks come from? Were they government funded? Were they funded through some other source? But just the way that mutual aid and the way that coming together and really saying, no one's coming to save us. We advocate with the government so that the government with its enormous tax base does something for us. But at some point, you got to create your own farms, serve your communities, develop your own projects, because the story has been told that this is what happens and it's not that big of a deal. And you throw some, paper towels into a crowd and everything's going to be fine. Or, you open up a shelter and there's no problem. Everyone can access the shelter. Well, in the US, undocumented people in a shelter, they don't feel safe. Queer and trans people in a shelter are often harassed or not put in the right area that they might want to be in. There's a lot of reasons why the government is not responding in ways that the community finds safe and protective and caring. And I know there's some questions in the Q&A, but I would just love to hear sort of a little bit more about when you were faced with the government didn't care what you had to say based on your many years of research and community engagement. Like, what do you turn to mutual aid, and do you then become community engaged projects only at a different level? Or did you try to do a hybrid thing, or I don't know what you did?
I think it's a hybrid approach, because when we were confronted with the fact that we were not going to be able to penetrate the decision-making processes, the state government was hiring the big ones, Rand Corporation, Cobra Energy, Whitefish, that was a real scandal. So when you look at the numbers, more than 95% of the recovery funding that was dispersed at that point was going back straight to the states. Nothing was staying in the local economy of Puerto Rico. So we started collaborating with these communities at the level of mayors, at the level of community leadership, etc. But at the same time, we were critical of that approach too, because communities were claiming the empowerment and doing their own thing for to survive, basically. But that is a very comfortable situation for government officials, because they don't have to do the work. And there's nobody holding them accountable for doing the work, because everybody knows that the government won't do anything, so we have to do it ourselves. So making reference to the double taxation thing, it turns out that you have to pay for your own empowerment, and at the same time you have to pay to keep the governmental structure that is supposed to be working with your resilience and your survival. So the narrative of self-empowerment and community mutual aid and all that, it is very functional at the moment of crisis, but it's very dysfunctional in terms of breaking up with the power relations and the marginalization of these communities.
And one quick thing I wanted to throw in there. I think I detected in your question a little bit of what was your method a little bit of methodology there. So that was peer-to-peer networks. We went to our university president. We couldn't even see the light of day in his office. Actually, that day, we had come in with pre-written letters making the institute and this letter was for him to sign. I mean, we were really putting it in his plate. We will take these letters to the commanding general at headquarters, making you look good. use your institute and make it available to all levels of government. He didn't even look at us. We went directly to the center of command, and we hit another door. That was actually when I saw that we had no other route, because there were people outside that door asking for water, asking for shelter. Okay, there were truckers that wanted to put their trucks to use in order to carry supplies and water and we had to trick our way to enter into the center. When we were inside, we saw that the stratification of power was such in there that we couldn't even penetrate the lower levels of power in that place. The only thing that made a difference was that we were operating on the understanding that this could happen. So the establishment of a network of peers, a network of communities that we have already made a relationship with, made that bouncing from that barrier to action much quicker than if we had started calling people to make a relationship then and there. This is something that we're trying to teach FEMA as an organization. You cannot go into places where you don't have pre-established relationships and think that those relationships are going to pop up and people are going to trust you and people are going to do what you tell them to do, no matter how hard you speak to them. And the level of ignorance of FEMA when they arrive at these places is pretty high. I mean, you don't go to a place with no electricity with your claim system to be filled out in a computer-based system and asking for somebody to enter into a tablet or a computer. Please, you don't go into a Spanish-speaking colony speaking English and expect people to understand what you're saying. So the diversity in our own country, it's still being dealt with in colonial ways, in colonial times.
If I may add something about the narrative of empowerment, community-based action. Something that we saw is that FEMA at the level of discourse was focusing on individual resilience. So the focus on social networks and community-based networks was not there. At the same time, FEMA itself was trying to circumvent the municipal governments and the state government, repeating the narrative that government is too corrupt, is too slow, too incapable. So let's go directly to the communities with this idea that if communities are doing the work, then let's go and let's put the money on the hands of the people who are actually doing the work. However, they call this the octopus model. However, there was a big issue with that because government has an infrastructure, bureaucratic infrastructure, especially dedicated for the administration of this type of funding and the administration of this type of project. When you go straight to a community-based organization, let's say a church, that is actually feeding the people, cooking and fixing roofs, if you ask them to design all this structure to administer the money that you are going to give them is counterproductive. At the same time, the funding that FEMA was providing to communities didn't involve overhead. So all the expenses related to the administration of the funding was going to come from the organization itself. So at the end, they were worse off using this type of funding. So something that in concept could sound really good, in the practice, it doesn't work as good. Yeah, you know, disasters are the coincidence of a trigger event with a social vulnerability. If you don't have the trigger event, and you still have the social vulnerabilities in place. So there are sectors of our society that live under disaster conditions always. And this is the case of the trans community. Going back to the film, I did some research on the experience of trans individuals after the hurricane. And if you allow me, I'm going to show you a list. Okay. Through journalist accounts and but investigative journalism, like real serious work, they identified patterns of discrimination in filing the claims, for example, in which they went in person to file claims at the centers established by FEMA, and the employee will see an ID that said Roberto Rodriguez, but it looks like a female. So they automatically assume that that claim was not going to proceed, so they didn't even file the claim.
IDs, yeah.
Yeah, the incongruences between the documentation and the physical aspect, you know, charged with all the prejudice and all the religious background in Puerto Rico and all that stuff, was a recipe for disaster on top of the disaster. It turned out that it's very expensive to change your documentation when you are transgender. So it takes from $1,500 to $3,000 to change your name. And if your name doesn't match in every single official document, the claim doesn't proceed. Lack of support system is a very important variable, because transgender individuals in very conservative environments usually lack of family networks, because their families don't want to deal with the person. So they are exposed to more poverty, they are exposed to homelessness, they are exposed to domestic violence. So that's also an issue. Lack of appropriate medical services. Like in Puerto Rico, there's only one medical center that treats transgender people. 3.5 million people, one medical center that treats transgenders people. And one of the issues with this community was the access to hormonal treatment. During the post-disaster stage, they didn't have access to their hormonal treatment, and that had a lot of consequences. Lack of gathering spaces and problems with the shelters. Those were two really, really, really important. When they got to shelters and they had to show ID, they were placed with their sex assignment at birth. And that exposed them to violence, like transgender women placed with men, you know, with homophobia, transphobia, and all that stuff. Even sexual violence was occurring in those contexts. And that was if they were accepted in the shelter, because most of them were not accepted in the shelter because the excuse was that because the IDs didn't match, they didn't know for sure if really was a transgender individual or it was something dressed like a woman to do something bad at the shelter. You know, with all the prejudice and all the presumptions that a very conservative society impose on these individuals.
I wonder if you learned anything about folks who were incarcerated and whether they're like what happened to people who were in prison during the hurricane.
I don't know. That's a population that has been invisible as well. And I have done no work, no research with them. So I cannot really talk.
From media reports, though, we do know that there's been issues with deaths and how many deaths have been reported. There's been actually the words that are used are words of just total abdication of responsibility by the state with that population. So, but no, we have worked with prison population as the institute before, looking for ways to collaborate with in programs that are related to just sustainable transitions, related to labor and capacity building amongst some of the members of the population to learn, for example, how to do installation of PV panels and roofs, and try to create a pathway to society. But really, it's hard to fathom the type of complexity. No, it's beyond complexity. Extreme operating environments in post-disaster situations are wicked problems. The amount of perspectives and interest involved in the resolution of that of that condition, and the level of uncertainty associated with those solutions, and I'm talking uncertainty, defining it as knowing what you don't know. When in fact the government of Puerto Rico was acting in terms of not knowing what they didn't know, total ignorance. So this brings us to another point that we really need to touch on. If institutions of higher learning are going to be what they promise to be, which are hubs of resilience to all members of society, including LGBT communities, vulnerable populations, we're going to have to organize knowledge in a different way. Because the way we're organized now in terms of what we know, is based on historical data, is based on knowing what happens when I saw it happen already. So I build I built my my knowledge on the basis of 100-year flood maps that gives me a total historical picture of what I need to do next. That is out the door with the type of complexities we're dealing in these types of events, which are climate related. So the Anthropocene is throwing universities into a place which some are calling a post-normal science space, where we feel comfortable, we felt comfortable before in our laboratories, we felt comfortable before as consultants to government. That level of complexity is out the door. I know that you guys in the library sciences are looking at this yourself, the changes that technological advance is bringing to your learning landscapes, and you guys are being forced to be innovative and perhaps even sometimes go outside of the university to link and develop relationships and collaborations. This is part of that same thing of universities trying to adapt and learn in very hostile situations. I mean, when you have boards, when you have endowments, when you have the type of pressures that land grant universities such as Minnesota has, and it's being confronted with valid claims from your African American community, and the fact that I cannot go out on the street without being afraid of being in contact with a policeman, or your Native American populations that are calling you land grab universities. And they're doing it in a very systematically and very well analyzed way. And all of these claims are bringing our institutions to points where those who are inside of them, us, we need to be agents of change. And that's why I was saying embedding ourselves in activities that go beyond our walls is I think it's going to be the way to the future. And I've talked too much.
I might be asking you to speak a little bit more, but I think, yeah, you're very right, I'm an outreach librarian, so getting beyond the walls of the university is important, but also ensuring, as you mentioned before, like, right, that it's mutually beneficial as well. You're not just going out to research a community and then you're returning back, right? How do we ensure that these partnerships are mutually beneficial is really important. I just want to shift.
I'm convinced that like libraries are special spaces, are actual hubs for knowledge sharing in more hierarchical ways, where the community should feel more welcome, and perhaps with interdisciplinary activities that actually are transdisciplinary, because they bring the wisdom of the community to the discussion. Libraries can become a much more trusted space and for dialogue and deliberation. You know what? We owe ourselves to be like the radars of our community, to be able to identify what their vulnerabilities are and their capacities also, and be able to share that, so that when FEMA comes down and it doesn't know what's going on, it's not because we didn't tell you, and it's not because we were silent in the face of these events, like if we did not know what we knew. Yes, we do. And again, I talk too much. I'm sorry.
Well, I hope you both have an opportunity. I'm not going to read the whole, if you open the Q&A, all of the wonderful remarks that folks have that have visited Puerto Rico, but I'm going to maybe join a couple of these questions together. So one of the questions, if you wanted to maybe expand on, how have the structural elements of public institutions changed since 2010, if at all, and the impact on equity for LGBTQ community members, and also, what constellation of movements and organizations on the island were kind of activated by the protests and have continued since then. So if there's anything you want to expand on in kind of higher ed, and also the community kind of activism realms.
In general, inequality has grown in Puerto Rico since 2010. Since then, we have had disaster after disaster after disaster after disaster. And the first disaster is the appointment of a fiscal control board by President Obama, in which 7 people who were not elected by the people of Puerto Rico are passing judgment and are making basically policy decisions that our elected officials should be doing. It's not that I'm saying that our elected officials are like repositories of wisdom. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we went back at least 100 years in our governance with the creation of PROMESA and the Fiscal Control Board. The policies that the Fiscal Control Board is imposing on Puerto Rico, austerity policies, austerity measures, don't have other consequence than increasing inequality, unemployment, lack of education services, like closing up schools. More than 300 schools were closed in the first years after the Fiscal Control Board took over. And now, with the earthquakes in the southern region of Puerto Rico, all the schools are destroyed and there's no plan to rebuild them. So after the Fiscal Control Board came to power, then we had the negotiation with the bondholders, in which the public debt was not actually negotiated to the benefit of Puerto Rico, but on the benefit of the bondholders, of course. And then Maria hit. So Maria was an opportunity for the Fiscal Control Board to say, okay, let's leave the austerity measures on the side for a little while until, we recover. Hold on, okay. But that wasn't the case. The case was to continue with the austerity measures. In fact, the budget cuts were even deeper. After Hurricane Maria, then throughout year 2020, we had a series of earthquakes in the southern region of Puerto Rico, and various municipalities are completely destroyed. We haven't received the money from Maria. Obviously, we haven't received the money for the recovery after the earthquakes. And then COVID. So we have a whole generation of youth that don't know what going to a high school looks like. And they are graduating from high school now. We have a whole generation of youth that, they don't know what it's like to study without emergency and without disaster conditions. So huge migration waves and people leaving the island, of course, and people coming into the island. Crypto people, currency people, YouTubers, retirees from Alaska are buying property in a very cheap value for different reasons, no? Because of the economic depression, obviously, but also because of a concerted effort to devalue property values. For example, this law that established opportunity zones. In Puerto Rico, more than 70% of the whole territory of Puerto Rico is classified as opportunity zone.
More like 99% of the island is an opportunity zone. But I mean, that's another of those euphemisms. But that is a great point to make when you talk about concerted effort. Okay, again, the Fiscal Control Board brought Puerto Rico back a century in terms of the governance of the relationship between the island and the US. When that relation started, we did not have a Puerto Rican governor. It was a military governor appointed by the army. So we went back in time to that type of participation in governance, or lack thereof. So under that regime and under that group of institutions that are looking to bring you back in time, the behavior of the local government, it files suit. So, for example, the Law 20 and 22 are specific laws for economic development, but this is how economic development is supposed to happen. You offer a tax-free haven for millionaires to come and buy property in Puerto Rico if you fall under a certain amount of conditions. And living in the island 365 days of the year is not one of the conditions even. So to add to what Marla was saying, there's this cycle of auto destruction that we see being enthronized in Puerto Rican institutional behavior, and political parties are exacerbating that with the usual cronyism and corruption practices. Not that corruption practices are because the political parties are bad. The only way that colonialism works is through corruptive practices, because it is a corrupt system in and of itself. So, but as you can see, and to answer the question of our colleagues that put that question, in the short to medium term, a lot more pain, unfortunately, when we're going back home to go back to the fight, not going back home to enter into some sort of vacation period. So it's a bleak picture. So what that means is we need to be more assertive in the types of changes that we've been talking about tonight, and better position populations such as the academic community to be able to mobilize quickly and embed themselves in the fight. It's the only way I see some way back, because right now we are back to 19th century bounty of war, a type of atmosphere, unfortunately.
I think we might have time for maybe one more question this evening, and maybe I'll ask Rachel, maybe you can reflect a little bit on research that you're aware of with the Tretter Collection, or researchers that have visited your collection, and then Marla and Cecilio can comment on your local experience, but a little bit more about how Indigenous and queer ways of being and understanding in relation to kind of biodiversity ways of knowledge, how those are kind of alternatives to the status quo, and how institutions and systems have kind of been researching and using these ways of knowledge. If you have any thoughts around that at all.
Well, you called me out, so I'll say a couple of words, although I don't have a lot of things that I don't have a lot to say, but I will say, I have a lot to say, but I don't have a lot of coherent thoughts that I can share. But I will say a few things. One is, I thought it was really beautiful and wonderful the way that folks in the film put it, that monoculture actually destroys the land and also makes it impossible for the people living off the land to survive, and that having a diversity of crops and of, you know, sort of in what you're growing and what you're farming it's also true. I mean, it feeds a community. It sustains life. It's much more healthy for the land, all that stuff. And the metaphor, the connection they made to that, to the idea that having one idea of, you know, gender and sexual practices is also potentially, you know, going to destroy the ground upon which we live, is not healthy for our culture and our communities. And that diversity is not about, it's not something we want to support because we are shamed into it and we have to do it because somebody says it's better in theory for some random reason, but that actually it's a way of really caring for a community and sustaining life and building a world that actually is much more healthy and able to work better, just as a general principle, is more sustainable. And I think that I do think that that's true. I don't think it's just a metaphor. I think it's a great analogy. So that's one thing that came to mind when you asked the question. I mean, the other thing is to say that there are really interesting things happening in terms of queer communities that are in a variety of different places, that are trying to think about how to engage in environmentally sustainable practices that are that address the climate crisis that we have, in ways that are very different than the, you know, sort of what Marla and Cecilio have been talking about, or what happens in the absence, in the aftermath of these disasters, and disaster capitalism, the kind of acquisitive capitalist hunger for, this is an opportunity, their prices are cheap, land is cheap, people are vulnerable, we can really take advantage of this as capitalists, but about care and caring for people around you. And I think, I mean, there's it's the idea that, you know, that queer and trans people, or certain kinds of queer and trans folks are always living in a disaster, or always living in a kind of crisis mode. And that, you know, are adaptive, the framework that you both were providing earlier, and it's a problem. It's hard to have to always be adaptive all the time, but that if we can really support local communities that are building sustainable practices from a place of being able to see the complicated crises that the most vulnerable people in our communities are living with every day, and to build a sustainable response to climate change and climate disaster and other challenges we face, that those are the people we need to be listening to, and that those are the solutions that are going to most be able to care for the most people. And, you know, if we can really push the idea that, you know, I mean, we've seen it with the vaccine distribution just alone, like third world countries aren't getting vaccines at all. You know, communities of color, which are suffering the most fatalities under COVID, are having harder time accessing vaccine sites or appointments. You know, that's the response to disaster, is that the more privileged people survive better. But if we can sort of really listen to people who are suffering the most, and actually have a care-based framework for how we respond to these crises, that's a better solution. And that is an idea that is really being, I think, put forth and developed, and solutions are being developed in queer and trans communities all around, I think, not just in the US and in Puerto Rico, but in a lot of different places. And I wish those stories were amplified more. I mean, this is the sort of, like, we have these kind of pat stories that we're telling about disaster and recovery that don't take into account the diversity of responses and community practices. And I I wish we could raise those stories up. That's one of the reasons why I really like this film, is it told stories that we're not used to hearing, that really amplify and tell a story about a larger crisis, but that also help us understand those crises through stories that we're not used to hearing. I'll stop there.
So much, Rachel. Yeah, Marla,
No,
would you like to go next?
yeah, it's something that I really liked from the film was this moment in which the four students were talking to the filmmaker, and one of them says, well, I identify myself as bisexual woman, but labels really don't matter. And then the other woman says, well, I identify myself as a lesbian because I need to put a label on myself because this is a political struggle. So I think that as soon as we understand that existing is political for transgender communities, LGBTQ communities, poor communities, women, people of color, etc., just existing is political. And that we have to open the opportunities for all that diversity to be represented in the decision-making processes, the sooner we will get to a more just and equitable society.
Cecilio, do you have some comments on that?
I have spoken too much tonight. I apologize.
No, not at all. Well, before we, go ahead, Rachel.
It's been such a pleasure to listen tonight and to learn from you both. And thank you, Kristen, for inviting us.
Oh, thank you all. Do you all have any last comments before we close up the evening?
Well, I would like to put my email on the chat box.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, are you all open to continuing the conversation with
Absolutely.
anyone that would love to continue on? I know we didn't have time to address all the questions, so please do follow up with our speakers after tonight. Again, you will get a link. I put several links in the chat box as they were speaking. You will also get those in an email tomorrow morning, along with a little evaluation feedback form. If you have a few moments to share some thoughts. And I just want to end by thank you all for your time, especially this evening, and sharing your wisdom and your experiences. It was very, very moving to hear those. And I think we all benefited greatly by understanding your story and the stories of your community and your research. I just want to let folks know we have 2 other events or activities, in this kind of climate change theme. We are having also on March 25th at 7 p.m. We will be watching actually together a documentary, so you don't have to do any pre-watching, but a short 10-minute film called This Land. You can always watch it, it's free online in advance, and we will have the filmmaker and one of the Black runners participating in this discussion, along with some folks from Mississippi Park Connection and one of our graduate students at the University of Minnesota, really talking about social justice, equity, and around conservation, around access to parks and things, because we do not see minorities and folks of color participating in going to national parks at the same amount that we see, say, Caucasian visitors, like 80% usually Caucasian to BIPOC folks visiting, say, park systems. So we will be kind of talking about issues around that. And then I want to encourage folks, it's been beautiful weather in Minnesota lately. So as you head outside, snap a picture. And if you're on Instagram, tag it with University of Minnesota at UMNLib, and then the hashtag Nature Heals, and you'll be automatically entered into a drawing for a U of M bookstore gift card. We're giving away 5 of those. So I hope to see you online at our event in March and participating in our little Nature Snapshot Challenge. So again, a little round of applause to our speakers. Thank you again for participating. Thank you all for attending, and I wish you all a wonderful evening.
You know what, Rachel and Kristen, now you've become hubs of interconnection with the island.
Yes.
So let's get to doing.
Yes, definitely.
We're on it. We're with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, thanks.